Yeah. So the question is, they asked me to repeat the question, that Gemara in Brachos says that Bilam's great talent was he knew exactly when there was great divine anger in the world, a split second, the amount of time it says to say the word rega, 2 syllables. And if you curse somebody in that exact second, the curse is going to be very, very powerful. And Bilam was able to know exactly when that was, and that's why his curses were successful. This is the Gemara in Brachos. So the question you're asking is simply this: what is the purpose of God having a tremendous divine anger just for a fraction of a second? What's the tachlis of it? So it's very good. So Gedal Yeshua talks about this, and he brings from Svarim that this is what creates Yiras Hashem in the world. Meaning we need, although it's a very low motivator, it's not a high madrega, but one of the basic motivations for us to do mitzvos is Yiras HaOnesh. We know that there are consequences. So Hashem wants our neshamos to feel that fear. It's like vinegar, right? If you take apple cider vinegar, you actually see it's 5%, meaning it's actually diluted. Apple cider vinegar is sour, but it's only 5%. It would be 20 times more concentrated. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts that tremendous 100% fear in the world for a split second that then gets diluted in the course of the whole day, and that creates Yiras HaOnesh. So Hashem in his mercy only activates it for a tiny little second, but that influences the whole day. So that's why they say that the reason why Bilam was not successful is Hashem canceled the kas for that day. It wasn't there. And that's how Bilam comes up with Plan B. Plan B, if you remember, was that after Bilam's curse turned into a blessing, so he then told Balak to encourage the Jews to be enticed by the daughters of Moab for avodah zarah and fornication. So the Sfarim say like this: Bilam is very brilliant. When he understood there was not a second of anger in that day, people are more prone to give in to the yetzer hara because they don't have yiras ha'ones. So he says, now is a good time to be machshel them. Had there been an idun rischa, a time of anger, the people would have been reluctant to do an aveira. Once there's no idun rischa, memela, they're going to be more united to do aveiras. Right, so that's how they learn that. So the purpose of what's called the idun rischa, the time of anger, is that there should be a yiras ha'inish in the world. Yeah.
Also in last parsha in Balak, almost every Aliyah started with the name of either Balak or Bilam. Do you know if there was a specific reason like that?
Yeah, I'm going to have to look at that. Let me just say a word, although it's digression a little bit, that the division of the Torah into aliyos. Now, of course, we know that the Kriyas Torah of Shabbos has to be 7 aliyos. That we know, that's already in the Mishnah. But in truth, there is no halacha where you have to divide it. There are certain places where you're not allowed to divide it. In other words, you're not allowed to end an aliyah within 3 psukim before the end of a paragraph, a psuch or a stuma. You're not allowed to begin an aliyah within the first 3 psukim of a psuch or a stuma. So there are restrictions. Those are halachic restrictions. Then there are custom restrictions. You try not to end with a bad thing or begin with a bad thing. That's already a minhag. But other than that, the breaks could be made in all sorts of places. That's why in a lot of shuls, not so much in the yeshiva world, they actually add extra aliyot on Shabbos. Let's say there's a bar mitzvah or a simcha, they'll add extras because they can break it in different places. So it's interesting to know, and I actually don't have the information, like who divided our aliyos, where they're going to be divided. Clearly, it's a later thing. In other words, if you would have gone to a Kriyas Torah 1,000 years ago, the breaks might have been in different places. So why whoever did the dividing did it, that Balak Bilam begins almost every aliyah? That's a good question, so I'll see if I can find anything. I just wanted to point out that that's not a halachic requirement by any means. Yeah.
So last Shabbos, I accidentally stumbled upon a Rashash minyan. I was wondering who the Rashash was. and what is going on with the Mikubal.
Wow. Was it like a 6-hour minyan? How long was it?
It felt like it.
It felt like it may have been. Yeah. All right. So the word Rashash, two people called Rashash, and they're very, very, very different. One that's more familiar to Yeshiva Bachrim, Yeshiva Avraham, is Rav Shmuel Strashan, who was a great, very wealthy, but a great Talmud Chacham in Vilna. And when the Vilna Shas, our definitive Shas is really the Vilna Shas of the 1890s, and they were trying to collect many meforshim, because they were trying to make their Shas the greatest that ever was, and indeed it was. All the great Shasim that we have, Oz V'Hadar, all of that modern Shasim, are based on this magnificent Vilna Shas. So among the people they included were the Chidushim of Rav Shmuel Strashon, called the Rashash, which is in the back of your Gemaras, right? So that's when a Yeshiva Bacher or a Rebbe says Rashash, they mean Rav Shmuel Strashon, who died in the late 1800s, one of the great families of Vilna. In fact, the whole Strashon family was a great family in Vilna, and Rav Shmuel Strashon was a great Talmud Chacham. That is what an Ashkenazi means when he says the Rashash. When a Sfardi or a Makubal says the Rashash, they mean a different person who was earlier, like over 100 years earlier. This is Rav Sholom Sharabi, who was a Yemenite Makubal who lived in Yerushalayim, and the Rashash wrote commentaries on the writings of the Ari, and his meditations of the Rashash on the Siddur, Kabbalistic things you think about when you daven. So it's a Kabbalistic series of very, 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 very complicated, intricate meditations that can take hours and hours. I don't mean only on Shabbos. I'm talking about a weekday mincha or something. Could easily be an hour and a half if one is following this. And you can go into a farm store. And not that we would understand it necessarily, but you can buy Siddur HaRashash and see what's doing. So essentially what the Rashash is, the Rashash was a great 19th century Makubal who greatly elaborated on the Kabbalah of the Arizal and built many meditative kavanos that you think about when you daven. Okay, so that's the Rashash. So two different people go by the abbreviation, the acronym Rashash. Yeah.
What is the difference in the mehalech between the Goyin and the Chassidism?
Yeah, so the question becomes the mehalech, or the machlokes, between the Vilna Gaon, Rebbe Aliyah of Vilna, and the Hasidic movements. This goes back to the 1700s and the like. You know, it's interesting, just as a little aside, everyone knows the Vilna Gaon had a great hisnagdus, a great opposition to Hasidus, and this was a major opposition. The Vilna Gaon was not a person who got involved in politics. The Vilna Gaon devoted his life essentially to learning Torah and to teaching Torah to Talmidim. He was not the Rav of Vilna, although he wrote his Piskei Halacha, but he was not necessarily somebody you would go to for shilas, and he was not involved in communal affairs that much. Almost the only issue in which he mamish put himself out there was the opposition to Hasidus. The interesting thing was that in his lifetime, what he was known as Hagon HaChassid Mivilna. He was called a Chassid because he was, of course, obviously phenomenally great in Torah learning, but he was also extremely pious. And actually, Chassid was the name that was given to him, not, of course, as a member of a Hasidic movement, which he obviously was not, but in terms of his own piety. So keep in mind the following. Keep in mind that the Baal Shem Tov, who is Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, who is said to be the founder of Chassidus, is the generation before the Vilna Gaon. So by the Vilna Gaon's time, we already have the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, the Mezeritcher Magid, Rav Dov Ber, and already even the Balatanya. The Berditchever, this is the third generation of Chassidus already. And in the Baal Shem Tov's time, if you talk about the Hasidic movement was very small. The Baal Shem Tov had I don't have an exact number, but let's say 50 to 100 Talmidim. Chassidus was not a mass movement that had taken over much of Europe. It was a very small little group of people. The Maggid of Mezerich was actually the one who created Chassidus as a massive movement that eventually, certainly outside of Lithuania, right, Litvak was the Misnagate stronghold, but outside of Lithuania, most of the frum Jews in Poland eventually became Hasidim, and Ukraine and the like. It became a huge mass movement. So the Vilna Gaon, and he was not the only one, he was not the first one, and he was not the only one. The Vilna Gaon saw many problems in Hasidus. Hasidus, on the other hand, started for a number of reasons. It started to emphasize, again, and you understand that any movement in Judaism that's an authentic movement, by definition, cannot be totally new. If something is totally new, by definition, it's no good. But the way movements work is that certain ideas that were neglected in the past kind of get brought to the forefront again. So it was felt, the Baal Shem Tov felt that there had been a yerida, a decline in Avas Yisrael, in Achdus, in these inyanim. So the Baal Shem Tov wanted a simple Jew who was not able to do a lot of learning, was made to feel inferior, as if he wasn't important. So the Baal Shem Tov wanted to create what's called a hisorus, an awakening in Avas Yisrael, just like Rebbe Saul Salanter in the Litvisher world created the Musar movement, emphasizing with Adam L'Chaver. The Baal Shem Tov wanted to create Achdus, Avas Yisrael, also a sense of Hashgacha Pratis, which is a very big part of the Baal Shem Tov's Shita, that God is watching over us and protecting us every single step that we make. There's even Hashgacha Pratis on leaves, why is this leaf on this tree at this time? So far, the way I describe Chassidus sounds good, sounds nice. Who's going to argue with Chassidus? It's like attacking, baseball, apple pie, motherhood. Who's against any of those inyanim? But the Vilna Gaon saw a number of sakonos in Chassidus. Some of them are a bit esoteric, and some of them are more beferish. Number one, the Vilna Gaon saw, by emphasizing the idea that every single Jew is beloved by God, although that's emes, there was a sense that some Chassidim were mizalzel in the importance of learning Torah, and they were mizalzel in Talmidei Chachamim. They basically took the position, hey, I'm as good as you, you're no better than me. The Vilna Gaon saw that as a tremendous sakana for Klal Yisrael, because people were not machshav Torah, or at least the movement could create an environment where people were not machshav Torah. And indeed, in the Nefesh HaChaim, written by the Vilna Gaon's Talmud, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, he writes about the fact. He never mentions Hasidim by Hasidim, but he calls them Mavakshay Hashem. And he's talking about Hasidim. He says, they sit in a Beis Medrash, he says, and there's not even a Shas in the Beis Medrash. And all they have are Tehillim, and they pray. And he says, Baruch Hashem, it's a beautiful thing, but they're not connected to Torah learning at all. And they're Mavazeh Talmidei Chachamim. Now, another Nakuda related to this is, Chassidus very much emphasized that it's not enough just to do mitzvos. You got to do mitzvos with your heart and with your soul and with Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And it's the Avas Hashem and the Yiras Hashem that's the most important thing. Again, sounds pretty good, but the danger was this. Two dangers. Some people said, if I'm not going to learn totally lishma, I'm not going to learn with Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, then why bother doing it at all? As opposed to Chazal's own teaching, that you learn Torah Shelo Lishma, Mitoch Shelo Lishma Ba Lishma. And again, once again, the Nefesh HaChaim addresses all of these issues. So number one, there was a yerida in Kavod HaTorah and Kavod Talmidei Chachamim, and they also used the Shelo Lishma argument. That guy might know Shas, but he's not learning 100% Lishma. Number two, it translated into them not learning. When I say them, I don't mean everybody, but there was a segment. Them not learning, because I can't learn Lishma. And number three, there was a tendency to be mezalzel in Kiyum HaMitzvahs, if they felt they could be more spiritual without it. An example would be Zaman Kriya Shema, Zaman Tefillah. So Zaman Kriya Shema, let's make up a time. Zaman Kriya Shema is 8 a.m. But 8 a.m., I'm still tired. I want to sleep some more. And if I daven before 8 a.m., I'm going to be tired, and I'm not going to be makabel ol malchus shamayim. So tell me, what does Hashem want more? Does Hashem want more that I get up at 8 a.m. and I rush through Kriya Shema half asleep? Or would Hashem want me to get up at 12 noon and with geschmack and with passion and with fire do the mitzvah? So some Chassidim said, of course, a Kriya Shema with Kavana at 12 noon is better than a Kriya Shema without Kavana. As a result, I'm going to use a fancy English word, there was an antinomian, that means against the law, an antinomian tendency in early Chassidus, in which pratim of mitzvahs were not so important if they interfered with spirituality. Now again, any of you who have learned Shar Aleph of the Nefesh HaChaim now can understand why Rav Chaim Volozhiner talks about the things that he's talking about. He says you got to do the Maisa, and that's more important than the Kabbana. He's actually writing Keneged Chassidus. It's 100% the case, although he was very mild. The Gra was much tougher. Rav Chaim Volozhiner speaks, and I'll get to that in a moment. Right, so that's one situation right there. Now, the other problem that the Gra had was, again, a whole bunch of problems, is that they were Meshanim in Hagei Tefillah. It was the minhag of Chassidus that because they were very connected to Kabbalah, they adopted the Nusach Ari in their Siddurim, which is essentially Nusach Edut HaMizrach. That's why when we say, I daven Nusach Sfarad, that's Ashkenaz Sfarad. That's kind of the Chassidish adaptation of Nusach Ari, because the Arizal davened that way, and therefore the Kavanas followed that Nusach. Although the Chassam Sofer says, it's not that the Ari felt Nusach Sfarad was better, it's just that that's what he davened, so he had Kavanas. He would have had Kavanas for Nusach Ashkenaz too. But nevertheless, the Gra held it was absolutely usher for Ashkenazi Kehilas to deviate from those minhagim. They also had certain minhagim about shechita, which seems again innocuous. They used super sharp knives, which if anything is a hidur. But the Gra took the position that they were meshanim minhag yisrael, and that could be a dangerous thing connecting to the other things. And then finally there was an inyan. Again, there were isolated cases. I'm not going to say these were characteristic of drunkenness, mashke. In fact, even within Hasidus, this is a problem. I mean, the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to address quite a lot Hasidim getting too drunk and too involved in alcohol and shikris and hailulus. And they even had a bit of a perverse philosophy that this way they're serving Hashem even in Gashmias, whatever. It got a little crazy in the sense of, but in an extreme way, there was an idea that since a Baal Shuv is greater than a Tzaddik Gomor, there might be glorification. Let's go sin so we can become Baalei Tshuva. Again, that's, I would call an insane group within Chassidus, but the Gra was aware of it. And that bothered him. And then finally, there was an esoteric Kabbalistic idea, which may not bother us so much, although it's bothered some people here. Some people in the center had a nervous breakdown over it a few months ago. And that is the issue of tzimtzum. The Baal Shem Tov taught that the Kabbalistic idea that in order for God to create the world, he had to withdraw, meant, well, the standard meaning of tzimtzum is that this thing couldn't exist. I could not exist unless God vacated the space. If you take that literally, that actually means God creates me and God maintains me, but God is not me and God is not in me. Because that's what it means, tzimtzum. He withdrew in order to create. The Baal Shem Tov taught that's impossible, because the meaning of the verse, ein oid milvadai, means there is no place in the universe where God is not there. God is not just the creator of the universe, but everything is God. Everything. So the Vilna Gaon held that was very dangerous, because that turned into pantheism. I'm God, you're God. This is God. The rock is God. Why can't you daven in a bathroom? Everything is God. Now, so the Gra took the position, tzimtzum is kipshuto, this is called. God withdrew and created a halal. The Chassidish Svarim, particularly the Balatanya, takes the position, tzimtzum lav kipshute. Now, this may sound very esoteric and very abstract, but the stakes are very, very high. The Vilna Gaon actually maintained that the Baal Shem Tov's position of Ein Od Milvadai was actually kafira and avodah zarah, and pantheism, and all of those things, and therefore he condemned the movement as an avodah zarah movement, in which if I'm God because I could not exist unless there's God here, then why do I have to listen to God? I'm God. So the Gra held that was very, very, very difficult. So because of this, he participated in a number of bans. There were bans in the early periods of Chassidus against the Chassidic movement and the like, and cheramim, excommunications, that the Vilna Gaon actually signed. There are some stalwart Litvaks who take the position that those bans have not been expired to this day. I mean, a guy once went over to me in Baltimore around 30 years ago. I was giving a shir to a Hasidic group, and he said, you know, the Vilna Gaon put a cherem here. There's no evidence the cherem was ever withdrawn. Now, obviously, the Torah world does not agree with the cherem. In other words, does not agree that the cherem still exists. And the truth of the matter is, it's clear that Rav Chaim Volozhiner, who was the Gra's Talmud Mufak, number one, he never signed the cherem. Many, many Rabbanim signed with the Gra. Rav Chaim Volozhiner, unexpectedly, who was the Rav of Volozhin, he wasn't just a Talmud, he was the Rav of Volozhin. Rav Chaim Volozhiner did not sign the cherem. And it's a bit of a mystery. Why didn't he sign his own Rebbe's cherem against Chassidus? So the explanation Rav Chaim Volozhiner himself gave was, who am I to sign as a co-author with my Rebbe? He says, that would imply, oh, my Rebbe signs and I sign? He says, I'm a nothing, I'm not going to. But the truth of the matter is, maybe I shouldn't say this, it's not clear that he was maskim to his Rebbe in this prat. Philosophically, he was against what his Rebbe was against, but he felt that it's much more productive to try to engage with friendship and cooperation instead of charamim and the like. And that is why in the Nefesh HaChaim, where he writes his critique of Chassidus, it's a very gentle critique of Chassidus, very respectful. He does not call them Rishayim, God forbid. He calls them Mevakshe Hashem, unlike the Lashon of the Gra and some of the Charamim. And in the Volozhiner Yeshiva, Chassidisha Bachrim were admitted. And it is said that the Rav Chaim Volozhiner's own son, Rav Yitzchak Volozhiner, who became Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin after Rav Chaim died, and he was the Nitziv's father-in-law, had in his library Sifrei Chassidus that he would learn. Of course, Rav Yitzchak Volozhiner was a bit of a problem. Anyway, he wanted to go to medical school. I mean, there's an old Messiah that Rav Chaim Volozhiner founded Volozhiner Yeshiva, so his son wouldn't go to medical school. He said, I got to have a yeshiva to keep my Yitzchak in learning. So Yitzchak Volozhiner had what you might call, forgive the reference, Catholic interests, many different types of interests. Now, it is recorded in different sources that Chassidus itself changed a lot of its surah in response to the Gra's Hisnagdus. In other words, it actually became more halachically committed. It became more machshav Torah. So in a sense, the Gra changed Chassidus as well. They were no longer the group, or at least they didn't have a lot of the characteristics that he attacked. So it's very, very fascinating. For around 50 years, these charamim were very powerful. They were really like kind of a civil war. Afterwards, it kind of died down. If anything, the big fights today in Klal Yisrael are within Hasidic groups. You know, Ger and Bavov and Satmar and Lubavitch. Less so between Hasidim and non-Hasidim. But for around 50 years, it was a big source of conflict. In fact, a great scandal. Rebbe Kiv Eger's grandson defected to the Hasidim. Reb Leibele Eger became a Talmud of the Kutzker Rebbe. Now, that may sound innocuous, but that was big news then, that Rebbe Kiv Eger's grandson defected to the other side, and there were shluchim that were convinced that he was brainwashed or he was kidnapped, and they tried to reclaim him, etc. But as I say, today I think this would not make as big an impression as it made at the time. So that's kind of a kitzer, what the issue is. Yeah.
From my understanding, our neshamos are all unique, and we all have different jobs in this world. So I was wondering how it makes sense that a Rebbe in yeshiva could give over a mehalech if it might not be fitting for many of the communities.
Yeah, so the question becomes that each of our neshamos are very different. We are unique because Hashem is infinite, and every person reflects a facet of the infinity of Hashem, right, at a slightly different wavelength. So how is it possible for a Rebbe to talk to 20 people and give them a derech, give them a mehalech, which may not correspond to the essence of their neshama? No, that's exactly right. This is why the ideal educational system of the Torah is v'shinantam levanecha, that a parent teaches a child, right? Not to have schools, not to have yeshivas. A parent teaches a child, one-to-one, homeschooling. And the reason is because chanoch l'naro pi darko, as Shlomo Melech says, you have to teach a child according to their unique derech. Everybody's different. And the only reason we have schools is a takana, a great takana of Rabbi Yeshua ben Gamla, because at various times parents were no longer capable of taking, either a number of kids were orphaned and parents were no longer capable because of parnasa, so we needed to have schools. But l'maisa, you're right, by definition, there's a yerida there. Now, the short answer I would give you is that a Rebbe teaches a mehalech, but how that mehalech is understood can itself be divided in many, many, many ways. If you take, for example, the great Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, right? The whole derech ha'iyun in at least the non-Chassidish yeshivas is based on Rav Chaim, right? So we're talking about Mir, Slobodka, Volozhin, and today all the yeshivas in the basically whether it's YU actually is directly Brisker, Ner Yisrael. I mean, any yeshiva you want, Lakewood. It's all based. It's miyusad on Rav Chaim. But Rav Chaim had many, many, many talmidim, each of whom kind of have a different derech. There's Rav Shimon Shkop, and there's Rav Chanan Wasserman, and there's Rav Baruch Ber, and there's Rav Yisrael Zalman, and there's Rav Yecheskel Avramsky, and many, many more. And although you might not know exactly who these people are, all of them at least, and how they're different, but they're very, very different. And the godless of a Rebbe like Rav Chaim was, he didn't create cookie-cutter imitations of himself, but each Talmud took the raw material that he got from Rav Chaim. Even the Chazon Ish was connected to Rav Chaim briefly, and was able to mold it according to their kochos and their understanding. So you're right. We hear one Torah, but what we do with it will depend very much on the individual nature that we have. And that's the challenge of every parent and every Rebbe, that even though we're teaching a class or we're raising a family, we have to try to be attuned to the uniqueness of the Talmud. So it's a good point. Yeah.
I'm wondering what some of the halachot and havim are for going up the Har HaBayit in today's day. What are the different opinions?
Yeah, I got to be careful about this, about going up to the Har HaBayit, because this is one of those things that people have very strong feelings about. And I know from days of hate mail and everything else that when I say the wrong thing or what people think is the wrong thing, I get a lot of response. So I'm going to say this. The basic idea is obviously there is a dispute among Rabbanim, Poskim, whether you're allowed to go to the Har HaBayit. Now the basic shaila is like this. All of us today are tamei met. All of us today have been in contact with a dead body at least once in our lives, in a cemetery, in the OL, in a roof. We're tamei met. Once you're tamei met, there is no way you can get purified forever and ever and ever, even if it's been 50 years since you were in a cemetery, until you are sprinkled with the ashes of the para aduma. Right now, we don't have para aduma, although that's another shaila. Some people are okay, but we don't have para aduma. So, as a result, everybody agrees we are tamei met. Okay, now, what restrictions are there in a tamei met? So, in the Midbar, there were 3 camps. The Mishkan and the courtyard of the Mishkan was the camp of the Shekhinah. Around that was the camp of the Leviim, and around that was the camp of the Yisraelim. A tamei met is allowed in the camp of Yisrael, and a tamei met is allowed in the camp of the Leviim. A tamei met is not allowed to be in what is called the camp of the Shekhinah. If a tamei met goes into what is called the camp of the Shekhinah, he's chayav kares. Now, everything I said now, there's absolutely no machlokas whatsoever. The question simply becomes, how do I translate these categories to the Temple Mount? Now, the Temple Mount, Har Moriah, is not all of it is Machane Shekhinah. There's part of the Temple Mount that was the temple courtyard called the Azara, and the Heichal, the temple itself, and the Kodesh HaKodashim. In the Azara, and in the Heichal, and in the Kodesh HaKodashim, it absolutely is the case. A tamei met is not allowed to enter. Outside of those areas, there may be some areas that rabbinically are prohibited, but most of the Temple Mount is in fact Machane Leviah, the camp of the Levies. So if we were writing in a purely halachic way, without any other concerns, there is no question that there are large sections of the Temple Mount where a tamei met is allowed to go, and there are smaller sections of the Temple Mount which if a tamei met goes, they're chayav kares. Okay? So theoretically, what should have been done, or what could have been done is, well, in fact, they do it, those who go do this, that those who matter say, go in this area and don't go in that area. And that makes sense halachically, although I do want to point out that even the areas that you're allowed to go as a tamei met, you're not allowed to go if the woman is a nida or the man had a seminal emission. So even then, it's not the pshat, anybody can go no matter what, but at least you can go to the mikveh for those things and you can go. Okay. So those who moderate simply say, put up signs, go here, don't go here, what's the problem? So the question becomes, if indeed that is the case, so why is it that at least the Haredi Gedolim, by and large, say it is absolutely forbidden to go on the Temple Mount? So there are two different reasons that are given, and the reasons are not the same. Reason number one is simply we are uncertain where the boundaries are. And therefore, yeah, in principle, there are areas you can go, but we're not sure. Was the Kodesh HaKodashim here? Was it there? Was it there? Was it there? And that will affect the whole layout of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, misafek, we don't go there at all. Now, the proponents of the Har HaBayit hate that reason. They hate that reason, and they will attack me. Why do they attack me? Because, what do you mean we don't know where to go? Let's say there are 5 possibilities. But no matter what your possibility is, there's going to be areas you can go. Okay, so they're going to hate this reason. But that brings me to reason number 2. Reason number 2 is not that we're mesupek, that maybe you're going in the wrong area, but we're afraid that even if you go in the right area, you may overstep your boundary. That's a different cheshbon. It's not that every inch I walk is a suffix, but once you open it up, you know, my kid wants to run under the Dome of the Rock to get a good picture of it or whatever it would be. It's like a minefield. Let's imagine that in this floor, there are a bunch of live landmines that are in the ground. Meaning you step in a certain place. So I tell you, don't worry about it. As long as you stay 1 inch away from this line, everything's going to be okay. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't feel that secure walking there. You know, what if I lose my balance or whatever it would be? It's a chiyuv kares. Okay? So in reality, there's not so much of a machlokas in principle here. I think the basic principles everybody agrees to. But it's a machlokas about caution and the fear that people will break the boundaries. Because after all, if you're not religious, you go anywhere in the Har HaBayit that the Arabs let you go, wherever that is. So I'm a religious guy, and there's a bunch of other tourists going there. I mean, it's very easy for a person to cross the line. So that's the basic machlokas. Now, if you go to the Har HaBayit, there are a lot of halachot that you have to observe. You do have to go to the mikveh beforehand. You do not wear leather shoes It's not kavod. You shouldn't even bring a money wallet and the like. There are many, many laws of kavod hamikdash that you do have to be very, very careful of. So if you do go, you have to go with reverence. Some say you should not take pictures. Others are megalan, taking pictures. As I say, I myself do not go to the Har HaBayit, so I have not experienced this full hand. But you do have to be zohir in kedusha. The Har HaBayit is not a tour. From our perspective, it is not a tourist destination. It is a holy site. One of the cruel ironies of our matzav, and this is really a reminder that we are in Gullus very much, is that the Arabs control the Temple Mount. They control the Temple Mount. And this was a decision that was made in 1967 by Moshe Dayan, who kind of gave the keys to the Temple Mount to the Arab Waqf. And as a result, I'm not sure, the law may change, but for a long time, you were not allowed to daven. You could not recite a bracha on the Har HaBayit. The Arab and even the Israeli police were watching you. If you said a bracha, you tried to daven, they would arrest you. They would arrest you because the fear would be there would be a riot. An amazing thing. In a Jewish country, on the site of the Beis HaMikdash, you were not allowed to daven. So people would have to bring in a newspaper, and their sitter would be in the newspaper. In fact, there was even a story, this actually created a riot, so you got to be careful with that too, about a couple who wanted to get married on the Temple Mount. I don't know if they were from or not, I'm not sure. So they took a picture of it. I mean, basically it was, they're walking side by side, they're carrying a newspaper, and they had a close-up picture of the guy slipping a ring on her finger, you know, under the newspaper. And they took a picture with the two witnesses watching, you know, etc. That created a riot. When the Arabs saw the picture, they did all sorts of things. So that's a shanda, and that's really a reminder. You know, in 1967, when we conquered the old city and we regained access to the Makom HaMikdash, so there were people talking about, maybe you don't need Tisha B'Av anymore. You know, we have the Makom HaMikdash, although that's not the Beis HaMikdash. But this is a very vivid reminder how much we still do not have. Yeah.
So what does it mean that when we're near the Kotel, the Shekhinah is more there, and why are we like at the western wall that's there versus the eastern wall? Like why specifically there?
Yeah, what is the significance of the Shekhinah being in a certain place? So first of all, it's 100% the case that Hashem is everywhere, no question about it. Hashem is in Los Angeles the same way he is in Yerushalayim, right? As the Zohar says, Les asar panoi minei. There is no place that is emptied of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That goes back to the controversy between the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov regarding is Hashem, you know, here, you know, whatever it will be. So what does it mean to say that the Shekhinah is more in one place than in another place if Hashem is everywhere? So the answer is Shekhinah is not the same term as Hashem. Hashem is everywhere. But Shekhinah is the ability of the human being to perceive the connection to Hashem. It's like a cell phone or like a radio, right? You have zones where you have reception, and you have dead zones where you don't have reception. So the pshat is Hashem is everywhere. But here, I'm able to receive a connection to Hashem more than I might be able to receive in Los Angeles or Montana or whatever it is. So really, you're not so much dealing with the atzmius. You're not dealing with the essence of Hashem. You're dealing with the ability to be connected to Hashem. And that is what Shekhinah means. And we believe that Hashem was more accessible in Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael, more than Chutz La'aretz, in Yerushalayim, more than the rest of Eretz Yisrael, in the Makom HaMikdash, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and to this very day. Wherever we daven, anywhere in the world, we have to turn in the direction of Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim we turn in the direction of the Mikdash, and ultimately we turn in the direction of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. All tefillas are directed horizontally before they go vertically, meaning to say, my tefillos move to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and from then they ascend to heaven. So the question then becomes that we are told that when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, so the Shekhinah remained in the western wall, the Kosel Maravi, which, by the way, is not a wall of the temple. The Kosel Maravi is actually a wall of the Temple Mount, the Har HaBayit, so it's not the Makom HaMikdash itself, but we say that that was the only wall that could never be destroyed, even in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, from the first Beis HaMikdash. At least part of the Kosel Maravi was never destroyed, and that was Hashem's reassurance that his Shekhinah will never leave us, even in the Galus. Now you're asking me why the West. I mean, Chazal say that the Shekhinah is b'mayrev, but what is the particular reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose the West to be his Makom Hashras HaShekhinah? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It seems to be connected with the idea that people used to worship the sun, which rises in the east, and therefore Hashem structured it so we turn to the west, away from the sun. Although in Chutz La'aretz you dive into the east, but at least in Eretz Yisrael, you turn away from the sun. That's right. Achurehen l'shemesh, your backside is to the sun, and therefore you're affirming belief in Hashem without the belief in the other of the Avodas Hashem. But undoubtedly, there would be deeper reasons for that. Yeah.
Is it permitted for a woman to wear animal print clothing?
I'm sorry, is it permitted for a woman to?
Wear animal print clothing.
Oh, can a woman wear animal print clothing? Mean clothing with animal pictures on it? With what?
Like a leopard dot.
Yeah, leopard. Yeah. So you're not talking about that. Well, okay. Are you talking about wearing like furs from animals, or just things with the prints, pictures?
Just the picture.
The pictures itself. I'm not sure what the yisr would be. In some ways, it strikes you as a little non-senios and too ostentatious. And obviously, a woman should dress, men and women should dress in ways that are not drawing attention to them. So there would be a problem here. I'm not sure what halachic issue there would be. Now, it is brought down that Nimrod, who was known, Nimrod HaRasha, was a very great hunter. And Nimrod had a special coat that he wore with animal pictures on it that had a koach to attract all the animals, and that was passed down to Esav, and that's why Esav was such a great hunter, because he had this animal attraction thing. So in some sense, it might be merames to a fascination with hunting. And the Neder Yehuda has a famous tshuva about, is there anything wrong with recreational hunting? You know, let's say I like to hunt, right? And now again, it sounds very strange, but there's a lot of people who like to hunt. I mean the goyim, they love to hunt. Why they want to hunt is very, very strange, but they do. And I'm talking about, chashuv people, Justice Antonin Scalia, Justice Supreme Court, people, they like to hunt. So the Neder Yehuda writes that for a Jew to simply hunt for the sake of hunting, he doesn't say it's usher, but he says there may be tsar b'alei chayim involved, but he generally condemns it because you're emulating the ways of Esav. A Jew doesn't destroy. That's one thing. If you're going to shecht to eat, that's one thing. We're not vegetarians, but you don't just get your pleasure in killing animals. So maybe, since the print of animals was associated with Nimrod and with Esav, so maybe it represents a connection to hunting. On the other hand, Bisman Hazeh, it's not connected to hunting. So I'm not sure what the yisr would be other than it's too public and it's not sneas and the like. Okay? Yeah.
Where does taking care of family, even to the smallest degree, like going to pick up your child or something like that, where does that sit in Avodas Hashem, and how should one feel about that? Is he doing like Hashem's work right now that he's taking the child to Gan and things like that?
Yeah. So the question becomes taking care of kids, either taking them to Gan, picking them up, taking them different places.
Working
what?
so they can have parnasa to feed them.
Working to support your family. What makam does that have in Avodas Hashem? The truth of the matter is that's a very, very, very important part of Avodas Hashem, and it's something that sometimes B'nai Torah are not machshav so much, because obviously the overall hashkafa that the yeshiva world encourages, rightfully so, is that learning is your primary avodah, and you got to focus on your learning, and that's a wonderful thing, and that's a very good thing. But that sometimes means that taking care of your kids is regarded as something bad, a waste of time. The truth of the matter is, nothing could be further from the truth. Although indeed, one should try to create a schedule where they can learn as much Torah as they can. But when you do chesed to your children, take care of your family, you are emulating the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who shows chesed to all his brios, and you're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you should actually feel that this is Avodas Hashem. When you're supporting your family, you are fulfilling your obligations under a kesuvah. Every Jewish husband obligates himself to support his wife. In fact, any guy that is in any married guy that's in kollel is only allowed to be in kollel, assuming he's not getting a living wage, which is almost universally the case. So he's not supporting his wife through kollel. If you're not fully supporting your wife, you are in kollel only because your wife is so much of a tzaddikas that she is mocheles on her rights under a kesuvah. Meaning to say, you don't have the right to sit in kollel. You are obligated to support your wife, but your wife can say, in the interest of you becoming a Talmid Chacham, I'll be mocheles, right? So when a person is working, he should feel, I'm doing a mitzvah. I am supporting my wife. I'm supporting my children. I'm trying to create an atmosphere where they could grow in Torah learning. So a person has to look at the time you spend with your children and the time you're working to support your children as Avodas Hashem mamish. It is Avodas Hashem. And you should be mispalel to Hashem, that you should make a Kiddush Hashem in what you're doing and look at it as a way of serving and glorifying HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. There's a certain genre of Gedolim biographies that is a little popular more in Eretz Yisrael than Chutz La'aretz, that kind of describes Gedolim, certain Gedolim, as this Gadol is so great, like he didn't know the names of his children or didn't know the names. They're writing it as if that's a good thing. Now the emes is, first of all, the claims are false. So I'm not saying, God forbid, anything negative about the Gadol. The claims are false. The Gadol knew his children. But my argument is a different kind, and that is, why do you praise that as something good? Is it a shevach for a person? So here you have a kollel guy who reads a Gadol biography and says, I want to be a Gadol. So, I'm not going to celebrate my children's birthdays. I'm not going to spend any time with them because the biography says Rav so-and-so didn't spend any time with his kids. That's perverse. That's corrupt. I don't want to sound like, the good old days, but the Gedolim that I knew, going by Moshe Feinstein and the like, I saw pictures of Moshe Feinstein who knew how to learn. Moshe Feinstein knew Shas and everything else. He was wearing a fireman hat, and he was sitting on the ground playing with his grandchildren. To be a loving person, a caring husband, that's Avodas Hashem too. To be a Gadol, to be a Talmid Chacham certainly, doesn't mean you ignore your family. You care about your family, you make time for them, and you make time to learn. You do everything. So a person who ignores his family is chaser, is pogum, is defective. The derech of Torah is not to ignore your children or your wife. The derech of Torah is to love them and to honor them and to spend time with them and learn at the same time. You get everything in. Rav Moshe somehow managed to play with his grandchildren and learn the Pri Megadim 400 times. Pri Megadim, I don't know how many of you have learned Pri Megadim. Pri Megadim is a very, very, very difficult, very abbreviated commentary on Orach Chaim and Yoredei, the Magen Avraham and the Taz, and the Shach and the Taz. So to go through Pri Megadim once would be quite a difficult thing that not too many people do. I mean, I have not been through the entire Pri Megadim once. I've learned Chalakim of the Pri Megadim. Rav Moshe went through the Pri Megadim 400 times, in addition to how many times Shas and Rambam and everything else. And yet, he had time for his grandchildren. That should, I think, mean something to us. Okay, so it's a real chaval when guys are not given the message of how to be a good parent and how to be a good husband. You know, we kind of, get in trouble for this, we kind of play a one-note symphony, although it's a very important note. You got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn. And yeah, I will affirm, you got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn. But you got to do other things too. And if you're not doing those other things, there is something distorted and something pugum in that. Okay, so that would be the basic answer I would give. Yeah.
Rav mentioned this morning idea of Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer Torah being by
Yeah.
Apostomos.
Yeah.
Did we say that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 12 Sefer Torah?
Yeah. So I mentioned this morning that one of the tragedies of the 17th of Tammuz that we fasted yesterday was a man called Apostomos, who's not really we don't know who he is, burnt a Sefer Torah on the 17th of Tammuz. So I raised the question that the Mefarshim asked. Of course, the burning of a Sefer Torah is a tragedy, but there have been many Sefer Torah that have been burnt. And we don't make a fast. I mean, we fast at the time. If, God forbid, I would hear of a Torah burning today, I would fast one day, but I wouldn't fast every year. So to make an eternal fast because Apostomos burnt the Sefer Torah, why would that be so? So I had mentioned from the Tiferes Yisrael, a very interesting pshat, that the Sefer Torah that Apostomos burnt was not Stam a Sefer Torah, but it was the Sefer Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, or maybe Ezra wrote later, that was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and this was the master Torah against which all other Sefer Torah were checked to preserve their accuracy, and that was a very, very big tragedy. This was the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's certainly a very, very big deal. So the question you're asking is, according to Chazal, Moshe Rabbeinu on the day of his death actually wrote 13 Sifrei Torah. Taisus and Menachos asks, how could that be? Well, he asked the Kasha, Moshe Rabbeinu died on Shabbos. So Frek Taisus Akasha, if Moshe Rabbeinu died on Shabbos, how could he write 13 Torah scrolls on Shabbos? He wrote on Shabbos. So Tosfos says, since Al Korchach, he did it b'derech nes. It must have been a miracle, because how do you write 13 Torahs in one day? So Tosfos says a chiddush, molachos that you do b'derech nes are not forbidden on Shabbos. So if any of you get into Hogwarts Academy, Harry Potter, and you're worried about Shabbos classes, you're allowed to take them. Although you may have a problem of Kishuf, that's a separate issue, but at least Chilul Shabbos is not going to be a problem. Malachos that you do through magic, or Kishuf, well, this is kosher Kishuf, this is, a nes, derech nes, this is considered mutter. So your question is, if Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 Sifrei Torah, then even if Apostomos burnt the one that was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, what about the other ones? Weren't there the other ones in existence? It's a good question. I don't know. It could be in the course of time. Since Chazal talk about that one as being the master Torah, it could be that the tribal ones did get lost. It could be that we didn't. This was the only one. This was the only one that we had, and we didn't have the other ones, or at least we couldn't identify which were Moshe's Torahs or the like. But that's a good question. Yeah.
Why do you think Rebbe Nachman of Breslov was very against Nevuchim?
Yeah, well, why was Rav Nachman of Breslov against Nevuchim? Now, the truth is, it's not just Rav Nachman of Breslov. It was the Vilna Gaon himself, and the opposite extreme of the Vilna Gaon, and many other people as well. This goes back to the idea of the role of philosophy in religious Judaism. Meaning, the Rambam's overall approach was that the mitzvah of emunah in Hashem, this is the Rambam's approach, emunah in Hashem requires an intellectual understanding of the nature of God and of the existence of God, and one is not one does not fulfill the mitzvah of emunah until you investigate the proofs for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and you come to the conclusion that it is as logical to you as anything that's logical in the world. And therefore, in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam goes through the issues of the existence of God and hashgacha, divine providence, through an intellectual lens of philosophical argumentation, in which he'll bring in Aristotle, and sometimes he'll use Aristotle as a proof, and sometimes he will refute Aristotle and the like. And this was the notion of philosophical understanding of God on a rational basis. This, to the Rambam, was the very essence of emunah. So what's interesting is that what the Rambam considered to be the very foundation of emunah, there were many, many people, the Vilna Gaon, Chassidus in general, Rav Nachman in particular, but not only Rav Nachman, they considered this to be very, very, very dangerous. They felt that once you start getting involved with philosophy, you never know where you're going to come out. Meaning, if you think about it, it makes no sense to tell a person, philosophically try to prove the existence of God, but just be sure you come out with the right answer. Philosophy, by definition, has to be wherever I come out, I come out. Well, what if I come out with apicorsis? What if I come out with kfira? What if I come out with a weakening of my faith? Now, granted, I believe the Torah is true, so if I could really come to the truth, I would come to the right answer. But l'maaseh, we're weak, our minds are not perfect, and it's very, very likely in many cases that I will come to a distorted conclusion. So this is what's called the Pandora's box. So they felt it is better for a maimon just to rely on what's called emunah pshuta, simple faith in Hashem, without getting involved in the philosophy. Philosophy will often be very, very dangerous and counterproductive. Yeah?
Just a clarifying question. How about in Sanhedrin, I don't remember where it's near Tzadik, it speaks about Sfarim Chitzonim or something like that? What's that specific? Is that...
Yeah, so I wouldn't automatically connect it to that. The problem with Sfarim Chitzonim, which is what we call the Apocrypha, is not that they were philosophical books. They were books of kfira, meaning they contained ideas that are wrong and contradictory to our Messiah. So that's a separate thing. The Rambam would also say those books are no good. So that's a separate miktsaya. But philosophia, the danger was that you might be led astray, right? I mean, I want to read about the arguments for the existence of God. So I read all the counter-arguments, etc., right? So that could lead a person down a bad path, and indeed, unfortunately, it has led many people down a bad path. I'm talking about people today. I thought I coined the phrase, but somebody told me it was already used, the mir apikoris, meaning the guy who's learning in mir, who's an apikoris. I don't mean to say Lashon Hara on mir in particular, but I use that as the phenomenon that I encounter in the street, where some guy will walk over to me. He's been in Kolel for 5 years, from birth, not even about Shuvah, from birth. And he says, he has 5 kids. He says, I no longer believe in Hashem. I no longer believe in Torah Shabbat Peh, because I came across these websites that try to show that there's no God, etc., or whatever the argument is, or the Gemara is made up, whatever the apicorsis is, and they get affected. They do get affected. So this is an old debate. This is a debate in Klal Yisrael that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Should we encourage philosophical study, or should we bedafka discourage it? Every beis medrash in the world will have the Rambam Sforim on the shelf. So a guy walked in to the Or Sameach beis medrash, but it could be any beis medrash. He says, he's walking around, he says, "Oh, can you tell me where they keep the Moreh Nevuchim?" Well, you tell me. Can you get me a Moreh Nevuchim from that shelf over there? Guess it's not there. And not only, this is a small beis medrash, but you can go to the biggest beis medrash in the world. The Moreh Nevuchim is not going to be on the shelf. It'll be somewhere. I mean, granted, every yeshiva has a Moreh Nevuchim somewhere, but you're not necessarily going to know where. So what's going on? The Rambam is the Rambam. If the Mishnah Torah is up there, Perish Mishnayos is up there, and every Shas is Perish Mishnayos. So why not Moreh Nevuchim? The answer is, I think there's a not such a subtle message that says, hey, this is not for you. Now, Lamaisa, I have to say, Or Sameach is a little more open than most places, simply because our problem is this. Our Talmidim who come, many of them come from secular backgrounds, so you've already been exposed to philosophical epicourses. You've already read or heard about Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris. So once you have the poison, we got to work with the antidote. We got to work with how the Torah responds to it. So here you can actually get a shir. Rabbi Gottlieb at different times teaches Moreh Nevuchim. You can actually get a shir in Moreh Nevuchim. But in a traditional yeshiva, the thought was, whether you agree or disagree, and you can disagree, the thought was better not open up that particular because you don't know where it's going to lead. And that's really Nachman's hashkafa and the Vilna Gaon's hashkafa. Just to give you one concrete example. You know, the Rambam writes in different places that although Chazal talk about demons, Chazal talk about shadim, he says, in fact, there's no such thing as demons. They're a mashal, they're a parable, they're an allegory for things. No such thing as shadim at all. It's just a mashal for something. The Vilna Gaon writes in the Bir Hagra that if Chazal say there are shadim, how dare the Rambam says there are no shadim? And the Gra writes, the Rambam was led astray by his preoccupation with philosophia ha'arura, cursed Greek philosophy that only cares about the rational, that makes sense. And therefore the Rambam could not embrace something that did not make rational sense. But the Rambam was led astray by cursed Greek philosophy. By the way, that's a phrase that Rav Nachman of Breslov, I don't know if he actually uses it, but that certainly describes his attitude towards philosophy, philosophia ha'arura. So somebody asked the Kutzker Rebbe, is the halacha like the Rambam, that there are no shadim? Or is the halacha like the Gra, that there are shadim? So the Kutzker Rebbe said, of course the halacha is like the Gra, that there are shadim, but once the Rambam paskin, there are no shadim, so even the shadim listen to the Rambam and disappear. That's what the Kutzker Rebbe said. That's why we don't see the shadim bisman Hashem. Yeah.
If we've lost entire tractates of Gemara, how can we trust the Gemara we have?
Yeah, so if we've lost an entire tractate of Gemara, how can we trust the Gemara that we have? So first of all, let me ask you, when you are referring to losing a tractate, losing a Maseches, what are you referring to? What are you thinking of that we lost? No, the what there?
400 sets of the Sefer
Yeah. So the one thing that we lost for sure, I'll get to that. The one thing we lost for sure is the Rambam writes in the Hakdama to the Parish of Mishnayos that there's a Talmud Yerushalmi on 5 orders of the Mishnah, except for Seder Tyros, where there's only a Yerushalmi on Nida, just like there's only a Bavli on Nida. Now, if you have 5 orders of the Mishnah, so that's Zera'im, which indeed has a Yerushalmi, there's no Bavli. Moed, yeah, Bavli and Yerushalmi. Nashim, Bavli and Yerushalmi. Nezikin, Bavli, Yerushalmi. But then we come to Kudshim, Zevachim, Menachas, Chulin. We have a Bavli on Kudshim. We have no Yerushalmi on Kudshim. So it turns out we only have a Yerushalmi on 4 orders in the Mishnah, not 5 orders in the Mishnah. So the Rambam apparently, as late as the Rambam, there was a Talmud Yerushalmi on Seder Kudshim that we mamish do not have at all. We don't have a Yerushalmi on Seder Kudshim. Now, I had mentioned a few times that around 150 years ago, some fellow claimed to have discovered a long-lost manuscript of a Yerushalmi on Kudshim, which he published with his own commentaries, and he actually had haskamas of Gedolim. And imagine how exciting it is to discover a lost Gemara. But it turned out he forged it. It turned out to be a forgery. So you can no longer buy it. I think it's on Hebrew Books, the website Hebrew Books. You can actually see it, but it's not. It's interesting historically, but it's not a sefer you can really learn from because everything is made up. It's made up Mamori Chazal. The guy who did it must have been a genius. He must have been a genius. It's hard to forge a Gemara. It's not easy. Even if you're a very big Talmud Chacham, to write something that could cause Gedolim to think this is Mamish a Gemara, particularly the Yerushalmi, where we're less familiar with the language, is a remarkable achievement. So you wonder, what is the psychological, especially, it's the type of thing you can't tell anybody either. You can't even boast about it. In fact, they say that's how it got out. You know, he told somebody. So that is a lost Gemara. Now you mentioned Yeah. So Avraham Avinu's Maseches Avodah Zarah, once again, that's Kaidem Matan Torah, and we're not sure if that was primarily halachic material or whether it was hashkafa or things like that. And Midrashim, we've lost a lot, for sure. And it's not clear how we lost it, because Rishonim refer to Midrashim that we simply don't have. So things got lost. We're not talking about got lost, 3,000 years ago. Things got lost 1,000 years ago. Before printing, things got lost and the like. So the question you're raising, though, is if we don't have the complete picture, then how do we know that what we have is correct? Because very often, even today, I have Bava Kama, but the Gemara in Bava Kama can only be understood because of a Gemara in Shabbos. And I got to know Maseches Shabbos in order to know Maseches Bava Kama. So the problem is, if I don't have everything, then what I do have, I don't necessarily understand. Right? That's your question. In other words, not that what I have is not accurate, but how do I know the meaning of what I have, since I can't compare it to the total picture, which is necessary? I mean, what do the Balei Taisus do? The Balei Taisus are always interpreting this Gemara because of that Gemara. I don't have that Gemara. What does that Gemara say, right? So it's a very excellent question. All I can say is that what gets lost is also a product of Hashgacha Pratis. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not allow us to lose anything we need for the fulfillment of the mitzvos that we still have. So Yerushalmi in Kodshim, it was Nogea Kodshim. So if we don't have it, we don't have it. And when Mashiach comes, we'll get it back. But we have to believe that anything that we needed to have, the Eibishter would not take away from us. I'll give you an analogy, which I think may be a very good analogy. There's a whole issue about manuscripts. We still discover new manuscripts of Rishonim that were never published before. In fact, the Meiri, which is a voluminous, the Meiri was not published till the 1800s and 1900s, meaning we knew of the Meiri because the Shita Mekubetzes brings the Meiri occasionally, but the full writings of the Meiri were not available until very, very recently. And we find new manuscripts, and if you go to a place like Jewish Theological Seminary, they spend a lot of time manuscripts of Tosefta and Yerushalmi and this Gersa and that Gersa. And sometimes we discover Gersais, Nuschais, which are very different than the Nusach we have. And we discover Shitas of Rishonim that are very different than the Rishonim that we have. And the question becomes, should that change the halacha? Because let's say the Beis Yosef is machriya based on Rov Rishonim. But the Beis Yosef had, let's say, 10 Rishonim. So 6 out of the 10 say this. But now we have 30 Rishonim. And when you calculate the 30 Rishonim, instead of it being 6-4 for one side, it's now, 6-25 on the other side. So do you change halacha because of these new things that you find? So the Chazon Ish famously said that it was hashgacha pratis that certain things were not available to Klal Yisrael at certain times. So if the Beis Yosef didn't have all of that information, it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon that not be part of the halachic process. So I think that insight would apply to what you're raising as well, meaning if HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away some information for us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying that information is not what you need. It's not what you need. If you needed it, you would have it. If you don't have it, fact, Rav Hutner was even against, maybe I shouldn't be mitzi last, you know the green volumes called lzecher Meforshei HaTalmud. Have you seen that? So lzecher Meforshei HaTalmud is really, really, really an encyclopedia of like every single Rishon and Acharon, just in terms, but very much Bekitzer, how they learned the Pshat, you know, things that had not been reprinted in like hundreds and hundreds of years. They bring up every single thing. The truth is, it's a sefer that kind of drives you crazy because you're learning Gemara and you look it up and it'll give you, 500 like pshatim on every word. It's a little bit, you can't deal with it. But Rav Hutner once said he didn't like the project so much because he said, if certain Sfarim have been neglected for 500 years, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a reason, meaning you're kind of bringing up the cemetery, so to speak. Meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted certain ideas not to be part of the Shakla B'Tarya so much. So there's no mitzvah to kind of recycle in Yonim that were not makubal in the Messiah of Am Yisrael. All right, okay, that's a bit of a controversial idea. But this is what Rav Hutner said, this is what the Chazon Ish said, and I think that might be the answer to your problem. Okay? Yeah.
Are there fewer Nevi'im than Kohanim today, and why?
Say again?
Are there fewer Nevi'im than Kohanim today, and why?
Yeah. So this is the mystery of why there are more quarters than dimes, right? The rarest coin in American currency is the dime, right? Dimes. Quarters are worth more than dimes, right? But there are more quarters than dimes. So you got a big problem. There seems to be fewer Levium than Kohanim, which demographically does not make sense, right? Kohanim are a subgroup of a larger Shevet Levi. So if Kohanim are a subgroup of a larger Shevet Levi, then why would it be the case that seemingly, although I don't have exact numbers here, there seem to be more Kohanim than Levium, right? In a shul, usually you'll have a Kohen, but often you won't have a Levi, so the Kohen has to get the double Aliyah. It is a good question. I'm not sure I have an answer. I think one answer might be that over the centuries, Kohanim were more medakdek in preserving their yichus than Leviim, meaning to say the following. Since a Levi is a chashivas, but a Levi is not as chashiv as a Kohen. A Levi does not have the special responsibilities of a Kohen. Even without a Beis HaMikdash, a Kohen duchens, there are things Kohanim do. So as a result, when Kohanim had daughters, they would try to be makbid that their daughters marry Kohanim. So therefore the shalsheles of kahuna was passed down not only through my son who's a Kohen, but even through my daughter who's a Bas Kohen. I would try to be mishadech her with a Kohen. On the other hand, if you were a Levi, so your son would be a Levi, Einachinami. But if you had a daughter that was a Levi, maybe you didn't care if she married a Levi or a Yisrael, and therefore in the course of time, so I'm blaming the women for this, through the birth of women, the yichus of Levi got diluted because it was not perpetuated in the same way. Just to give you a little story about how Kohanim were makbid. Today they're not so makbid, but in the Middle Ages, Kohanim were pretty makbid. They wanted their daughters to marry a Kohen. In Prague, there was a man. How does it work? The man was a Kohen. Time of the Maral, the man was a Kohen. He had 12 sons, and he had 12 daughters, each of whom married a Kohen. So on Yom Tov, he would duchen with 25 people. He, his 12 sons, and his 12 sons-in-law. The whole group, 25 people on him. And he said, this is a kiyum of the pasuk. It says by duchening, Ko sevarchu es b'nei Yisrael. So shall you bless b'nei Yisrael. Ko, chafei, 25. I'm doing duchening, hider mitzvah. You duchen with ko sevarchu, 25 kohanim. So that's an example. Again, I can't say for sure everybody had this hakpada, but an example of a man who was very makbid that his daughters marry kohanim. So that might be a reason for that growth. Yeah.
Last week's daf yomi, the Gemara has a story about I think it was with Adam, I'm not sure, how
late to his Rebbe's shir, and he was supposed to be like reviewing his shir with his student before giving the shir, and because of the fact that he came late, he was asking like people where he was, and like I think his Rebbe said like, oh, like we're gonna be like maybe he's at his funeral, something like that. I think Moreh says that I think it was Rebbe, I think he died because of his own talent. So and the truth is like I've seen a number of times in the Gemara how let's say like Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan also how like a Moraim would say or even look at a person in a certain way, and that would really cause unfortunately their demise. And and Chazal do say that like, oh, it was like Shgaga Yotzei Nefida, like that would cause these things of that sort. But it is difficult to understand because these Tanoim know that their words are powerful and they have they carry a lot of weight. So it just sounds difficult that like this would be like I don't know the punishment or the accident that they would be caused by.
Yeah. No, it's a very good question, and it's really Sorochian, in which you sometimes find that a Tana or an Amora would utter some harsh words. Someone was late and say, "Oh, you'll be late for your funeral." Harsh words, and the harsh words turned into actual curses that resulted in death, resulted in chorban. They would look at somebody, they would burn up. Shimon Bar Yochai. And the question would be, okay, it's only an accident. I didn't mean to burn you up. It was only an accident. But I mean, Lamaisa, certainly Chazal themselves say, Chachamim hizaru b'divreichem. Wise people have to be very careful with what they say. And indeed, Chazal used the lashon, and this came out of these stories. Divreim kegachal eish. Their words are like coals of fire. And then we have a general rule, even if you're not a chacham, al tiftach pel satan. Do not open your mouth up to negative things, because words have a reality. Words, in ways that we need to understand, create certain realities. So so even us on our madrega, we have to be careful not to speak in those negative ways. And kal v'chomer, how could the great chachamim not be careful? Now, some of the stories, now this doesn't explain all the stories, some of the stories, let's say Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, he looks at somebody and somebody burns up. That's a different Maisa. That's not that he wanted the person to die, but he felt affronted. He felt this was a bizayon HaTorah. So Hashem revenges, the feelings of a tzaddik. But that's simply Hashem responding to the feelings. But in the Maisa that you gave, that teretz is not going to be a teretz, because in the Maisa you gave, there are actual words that were uttered in a negative way. So I don't know. I'm going to have to think about this a little bit. By the way, I just can't help telling you I'm not sure if it's a joke or something to be worried about. There was a man in Brisk who had an awful toothache, and he said he just wanted to die. He wanted to. You shouldn't talk that way, but he wants to die. So the Brisker rep says he thinks it's going to be better then. Again, okay, it's kind of a brisker joke, but okay, yeah.
The Shiloh also, I think it was the Chida says that he says that when he says don't be astounded how many times you'll see in the Ibn Ezra you might even encounter some words of fear. He says that because a lot of what the Ibn Ezra says sometimes was tampered by the Talmud Torah, who inserted things that are very controversial, and just that was the reality that happened. And the truth is that I don't know if it comes with the Ezra specifically, but I've seen other ideas how there'll be a very difficult concept, and and in halach literature, the response that would be either Talmud Torah or Talmud Sofer, and I've seen many poskim say that when there's for example comes to mind Moshe on abortion, and he'll erase his postkos, and a Volver will respond to him and say So I guess was that a common phenomenon that happened, that people be tampering with manuscripts and for that to be a mistake?
Yeah. So there's a lot in your question, and many peripheral points that I would like to address at some time, although I can't do it now. The role of the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra sometimes says very controversial things, etc. Sometimes you might call them kfira. Other Svarim, not just the Eben Ezra, so we'll leave the Eben Ezra for another time, although it's worthwhile to discuss. But sometimes the teretz that's often given is, oh, it's not really Eben Ezra, or it's not the Rashbam, or it's not Rav Yehuda HaChassid, but when manuscripts were copied, someone just added different things. So when you read something like that, your first reaction is cop out, easy way out, meaning to say anything you don't like, you just say, oh, somebody else put it in. It's not. But the emes is, it is not as preposterous as you would think. In point of fact, before there was printing, and we have books, scholarly books that talk about this, before there was printing, and you were copying manuscripts, letter by letter by letter, if the sofer knew how to learn, had some knowledge, well, there was no compunction, there was no reservation against adding something. And Lamaisa, it was done. I'm not saying every time they use this, it's a teretz. A lot of times it probably is not a teretz. But it's not unheard of. People had a certain, it's very strange to us. People felt a certain freedom that they could be mice of things, even to Rashi. They added things to Rashi or whatever it would be, and they didn't always indicate. Now, sometimes initially they indicated this is a Haggah, and then later the next guy didn't copy that down, meaning initially it was put as a separate thing, and then it gets muvla, right? So it actually is, I remember my own reaction when I first encountered this idea, Tov Sefer, I thought to myself, you're just making it up. But the truth of the matter is their mamish was such a dover. Yeah.
In the davening Shmoneh Esrei, when we ask for forgiveness for slicha, we ask for chatati pashati. Let's say we did tshuva according to the proper, steps necessary.
Yeah.
It was sincere, and it was behemet, and we didn't continue. How often you keep mentioning it? The next week you keep asking for forgiveness for something you already asked for forgiveness for, and hopefully you did it properly.
Yeah. So there are really two answers. Number one, you never know. So this is your insurance policy. But number two, remember, our tefillas are all b'lashon rabim. So therefore, even if I'm perfect, which I'm not, obviously, we're not, but I'm also being mispal. Hashem should forgive Am Yisrael, and they should be zzecher to do tshuva. That's why our tefillas are b'lashon rabim. In fact, the Rambam was asked a slightly different question. The Vidoy of Yom Kippur that has all the Averos. So a person said to the Rambam, he said, I didn't do 2/3 of these things. I didn't even do them. So why do I have to be misvada? So the Rambam gave two answers. Answer number one is, if you would really understand the underlying nature of these sins, you would see there's not a single one you didn't do many times. Like maybe you didn't stick a knife in somebody, but you embarrassed them, whatever it would be. So if you understood the chait, you would know that you did it. And the second answer he gives is, you're also saying it b'lashon rabim for Klal Yisrael. And therefore, it's not just about you, it's about Klal Yisrael as a whole. Okay, I have to go pretty soon. Yeah, question.
What advice would the Rav have for someone who's maybe on their spiritual journey, experiencing like a spiritual slump, so to say, losing motivation as they're trying to go?
Yeah. So what advice do I have for losing motivation? Again, it's a very, very big problem. It's a very big issue. And a rabbi once said that if he would have the secret to motivation, he could change the world, quite literally. Motivation. But part of it is you have to kind of, as a surfer would say, you have to ride the wave. Meaning you have to understand that in life, things are not going to be perpetual thrills. And in Ruchnius, it's not always going to be, I'm inspired. But you kind of have a sense of commitment that even when times are not so great, I'm going to stick to it. And then you have emunah that Hashem is going to take you out of it. You have to remember that for the most part, the times of dryness are temporary. Now, if it really is long-term, then maybe you have to readjust what you're learning, your Rebbe, your shir, your yeshiva. There are things to readjust. I'm asking to that. But a lot of times you just have to have the commitment and the maturity that even when things are not going so great, I'm going to stick to it. And maybe you could also switch what you're learning. Learn something that's a little lighter, or learn something that really interests you. So if my head isn't good for Gemara today, I'll learn Chumash. But don't give up. The fact that you're not in your A game, so to speak, Doesn't mean you can't be at your B game. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Yeah, this is the last question. Yeah.
What does the HaRav say about that they say the takum nowadays, like in terms of, obviously for rabbis we do it, but nowadays like do we have to stand up for like a secular old person or even like an old person that's Jewish, but like we don't see that's done really like.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah. So the question is, right? There's a mitzvah to stand up, not only for a Talmud Chacham and a Rebbe, but for any old person. It says even if he's an Amoritz, 70, but they say Batakum, Badarta B'nei Zakein, stand up. The question is, people don't do it. Well, the Rebbe says people should do it, and if you look and you see Chashuva B'nei Torah, they will often do it. One should try. However, to be Melamed Zechus on the people who don't. These expressions of honor can be nimchal. There could be mechila on them. And if people don't expect it today, it's keilu they're mochel. But the truth of the matter is it is very, very proper to stand up, at least partially, for any person who's 70 and above. And the Gemara says a beautiful point. The Gemara says even if he's an Amoritz. Now, if he's not religious, that's another question, but even if he's not a learned person, because how many life experiences did the person have? Meaning, a person came to a certain age, he lived life, and he has a certain wisdom of life that you have to respect. And you see that if you know older people, you can see there's a certain chachma in life that they have from all of the years that they lived. Okay, stop here. Have a good chance.
Thank you for listening to this awesome production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.